Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you might be. And I see we have people from lots of different countries joining us, as far down as New Zealand, as close as Europe. It's wonderful to see you, and people will be joining in over the next few minutes. But we're going to kick off this webinar straight away. We've got a lot of material to be dealing with. So my name is Andrew Tucker. I am the director of Thinc, the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation. We are based in the Netherlands, a global network of lawyers and non-lawyers seeking to challenge the delegitimization of Israel and to promote a fair and balanced application of international law to Israel and to the Middle East generally. And we think that's important because we do think the almost obsessive attention and criticism of Israel is not only unfair, but it's also blocking a more open-minded, fact-based approach to the region. So we do research, education, and advocacy. And obviously with the current crisis, the war that is going on, it's terribly important that we get an understanding of the facts on the ground, and particularly of the legal issues. So our role is really today, the main objective is to give you a grip on what are the core issues facing particularly Israel in this conflict, and what does international law really say about it. I'm going to say just a couple of words by way of introduction. I want to give as much time as possible to our very important guest speakers. The events of the 7th of October, it's now 10 days ago, have sent shockwaves through the world. Jews and non-Jews alike were taken by surprise at this horrendous attack, and the brutality of the massacre and desecration by Hamas, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters of innocent people, babies, children, adults, and elderly, even Holocaust survivors. Over 600 people have been killed as a result of this attack, and the IDF has just announced that 199 persons, both Israelis and non-Israelis, have been taken hostage. We knew, obviously, they were taken hostage, but the numbers were uncertain. They're in the Gaza Strip. It's not known where they are, and it's also not known whether they are all still alive. The bodies of 1,500 terrorists, militant Hamas operatives were located around southern Israel. Israel has been carrying out operations in Gaza since the 7th of October. We've seen a lot of that on our television screens, the bombings of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Health Ministry says that 2,670 Palestinians have been killed and 9,600 wounded in the events since the 7th. Israel is preparing a ground offensive to go into the Gaza Strip. It's called up 350,000 reserve soldiers to be ready to fight on the ground. And all of these events have totally disrupted the region, but also our conception and attitude towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I think the position of Israel in the region. The international community from the very beginning was strongly supportive of Israel's right to self-defense. Unfortunately, not many UN representative bodies, but many national leaders and even the European Union strongly stated Israel has a right to self-defense. This was an attack on Israeli sovereignty. It was an attack from outside its territory into its territory. It's an international armed conflict, and Israel has a right to self-defense. However, in recent days, there's been a lot of pushback against this, and even just the numbers we've just cited, now more Palestinian lives have been lost than Israeli lives. And of course, immediately people start talking about proportionality and Israel responding disproportionately. So we're going to see, I think, in the coming period, especially if Israel goes into the Gaza Strip in a ground offensive, a lot of discussion at many levels. Of course, we've already seen the strong pro-Palestinian, even pro-Hamas demonstrations across the world, especially and including the Western world. Many major cities have seen demonstrations attracting large numbers of people supporting the Hamas cause. And so we're going to see a lot of criticism, I think, of Israel going forward, and a lot of discussion about international law. And the argument will, I think, be, amongst other things, that Israel is not entitled to be taking certain actions. It's collective punishment or it's disproportionate use of force or whatever. We'll see terms like this. So to jump into all of these issues, it's an honor to have two very important guests with us from Israel, international lawyers. The first who will be speaking is Maurice Hirsch, Lieutenant Colonel. He was Advocate General in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and he is currently with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, leading their Palestinian Accountability Project. And Maurice has been involved in this for many, many years and has a deep insight into what's actually happening on the ground, but also international law. Our second speaker is Professor Avi Bell, Professor of Law at Bar-Ilan University and at San Diego University. They're both joining us from Jerusalem. Jerusalem and Israel is still under heavy rocket fire. So if either of or both of them have to rush off suddenly into a bomb shelter, which is not unthinkable, then we'll have to think of something creative to fill in for them. But that's the reality we're talking about. They're literally under fire as we speak. So a couple of housekeeping rules, and then we'll launch into it. This session is being recorded. We will have a chat group open after the speakers have spoken, each for 15 or 20 minutes. We'll have a Q&A in which we will deal with your questions. So please put your questions into the chat. We don't want people interrupting during the session, but please write your questions in the chat and we'll deal with as many of them as we can. Do mute yourselves. We will probably mute you if you don't yourself. And we will draw this whole session to some conclusion. So I'd like to invite our first speaker, Maurice Hirsch, to speak to us about the conflict itself. So basically, Maurice is going to speak to us about the nature of the conflict and the issue of necessity, Israel's necessity of responding to this attack, and responding not only to the attack, but to the threat that is posed by Hamas. Avi will talk more about the international rules that apply once you're in a conflict situation. So international law makes a distinction between the rules relating to when you can enter a conflict, and secondly, the rules that apply when you are in a conflict situation. That's more or less the distinction we'll make. Maurice, it's an honor to have you. And the floor is yours.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome and thank you for joining us. As Andrew said, what I'd like to do is just run you through a little bit of the background. What brought us to this conflict? How did we get to the 7th of October? And a little bit of the reality on the ground after that. So I have to immediately, unfortunately, Andrew, correct you on one of the statistics that you gave out in the introduction. It was not 600 people murdered on the 7th of October. It was more than 1,400 Israelis, a few foreigners, Israelis, Jews, Israeli Arabs, who were murdered by the terrorists who breached the border on that morning, that black morning of the 7th of October. We're talking about, in addition to those 1,400 people, another 200 people who have been abducted and kidnapped by the terrorists into Gaza. All of those categories include women, children, babies. Some people were decapitated. the elderly, disabled, Holocaust survivors, people with cerebral palsy, sick people, everything of all the categories that you can imagine. This was probably one of the most heinous assaults on decent civilization by ISIS-style forces in a very, very long time. In addition, there were 3,500 Israelis wounded. Still, some of them fighting for their lives. Of the 1,400 murdered, there are still hundreds unidentified, as the terrorists burned and did other despicable things to their bodies, which really language shouldn't include words to describe those atrocities. And certainly not, I would, if it wasn't necessary to understand the level of depravity, I would say also don't look at the pictures. But you have to look at the pictures to understand what went on and the savagery that went on. We're talking about the invasion of over 3,000 terrorists from Gaza. Now, whilst it's commonly assumed and said that these are Hamas terrorists, the groups were much wider, unfortunately. They included Hamas terrorists, terrorists from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another internationally designated terrorist organization, terrorists from the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a member organization of the PLO, and finally, members of Fatah, the so-called moderate organization with which Israel has been holding dialogues. That organization, as well as the PLO, are both headed by Mahmoud Abbas, who is now enjoying the benefits of international legitimacy, being the representative of the Palestinian people. The terrorists invaded over 30 Israeli civilian cities, towns, kibbutzim that were along the border. These were the backbone, the stalwarts of the Israeli peace movement. People, cities that had hosted dozens, hundreds, thousands of Palestinians who they considered to be part of their households, who they'd employed over the last years, months, and days, even prior to the attack. Just to give a little bit of a background, in the 8 months from January through August 2023, there were over 400,000 entries from Gaza into Israel, mostly of workers coming to work in Israel. It appears now that those people coming into Israel were part of the Hamas plan, gathering specific, detailed, family-based information about and intelligence about their targets. The terrorists came into Israel armed with exact maps detailing the exact communities, and within those communities, each household, how many people were in the household, did they have a gun, did they have a dog, how many children were there. Very clear instructions. These were documents that have been seized on the bodies of terrorists, saying exactly what to do at the different stages. Take hostages, kill hostages, burn the bodies, burn the houses, burn the cars. This was a full-on terrorist assault on decent civilization in a coordinated, organized manner. The 3,000 plus terrorists who invaded Israel did not all go to one place. They spread out along the entire border, ensuring destruction, death, and wanton murder all over. The factors that played into this devastating attack were numerous. Just 2 weeks before the attack was carried out, before this assault on civilization was carried out, I actually wrote an article about the 4 different internal immediate Palestinian factors that were driving and were about to drive the impending violence, whether it be the stop of the money from Qatar that had been providing aid to the Hamas authorities for the last 5 years, whether it be the internal dissolution of the Palestinian people, of the Gazans, against the Hamas authorities in the Gaza Strip, whether it be the international discussion of, well, who will replace Mahmoud Abbas, the now 88-year-old Palestinian leader who's in his 19th year of his first 4-year term, and Hamas feeling that the international community were only looking at Fatah and were neglecting them, whether it be the internal power struggle within Hamas between Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza at the moment, and his opponent, Salah Aruri, another Hamas terrorist, each one of them vying for the title of, excuse the colloquialism, who's the baddest terrorist on the block? Who can, in other words, who can attack and kill more Israelis in order to garner internal Palestinian support? These four immediate internal Palestinian factors that were clearly driving the violence. The additional fifth overlying factor, obviously, is the discussions that have been held over the last months to come to increase and expand the Abraham Accords from the Arabian Gulf in the east to Morocco in the west, at the moment to include Saudi Arabia, a massive international and local player. Those discussions have obviously infuriated the Iranians. They see them as a threat, and therefore they have now activated their terror proxies, whether it be Hamas on our southern border, Hezbollah on Israel's northern border, in order to bring to the world, bring to the Arab world, pictures of Arabs killed by Israel as a means to scuttle any type of discussion of peace and expanding the Abraham Accords. Now, onto all of these things, onto all of these five immediate factors, there are a number of underlying constant factors that have been around, but have been sadly ignored both by the international community and to an extent, unfortunately, also by Israel. We're talking about the long-term PA Hamas brainwashing of the Palestinians. Ladies and gentlemen, you do not create 3,000 people who can get up in the morning, invade Israel, and then slaughter civilians en masse, babies, children, rape women, decapitate people, without previously undergoing intensive brainwashing. This is something similar to Nazi Germany did in order to prepare for the Holocaust. That is what has been going on in Palestinian society now for 20 and 30 years as a result of the control of the Palestinian Authority, of the educational system, of Hamas controlling the educational system in Gaza, and everything that goes around that mechanism. This is how Gazans, this is how Palestinians for the last 30 years have been indoctrinated to demonize Israel and Israelis. They no longer see Israeli babies as human beings. They see them similar to the Nazis saw the Jews, and they just exterminated them, as the Jews, in the terms of the Palestinian Authority, in the terms of Hamas, not only in the terms of the Nazis, are responsible for all evil in the world. They say it over and over and over again. They don't hide their words. They don't hide this brainwashing. We just sometimes don't want to hear. The constant denial of Israel's right to exist. Let's remember Hamas's charter, which defines the organization, declares all of Israel as Islamic waqf, as land, as Islamic ingenuity that cannot be given away to anyone or control receded to anyone. They deny Israel's right to exist. They promote the violent destruction of Israel. That's Hamas's being. That's Hamas's raison d'être, if you want. It's not necessarily different entirely from the brainwashing of the Palestinian Authority that also denies Israel's right to exist and also demonizes Israel. Into this, you have to throw the constant incitement, incentivization, and even rewarding of terror. Everyone, I'm sure, will have heard of the Palestinian Authority's Pay for Slay program. This is a program entrenched in Palestinian law by which the Palestinian Authority pays a monthly financial reward to all terrorists involved in the struggle against Israel. This includes terrorist murderers. Many of the terrorists who were responsible for the attack against Israel are on that payroll. People like Ali Qadi. Ali Qadi was the commander of the Hamas forces, of the Nukhbas forces, for the central reason. He is a released terrorist murderer. He, in 2005, murdered his employer, Sasa Nuriel, viciously, recorded his execution and then broadcast it to the world. He was arrested, sentenced to life, but was then released as part of the deal to free Gilad Shalit in 2011. Not only the terrorists in prison receive a salary, but also released prisoners, so released terrorists receive a salary. So whilst the Palestinian Authority continued to pay Ali Qadi, he wasn't like the rest of the Gazans struggling for their daily bread. He was receiving a monthly guaranteed salary from the Palestinian Authority, which allowed him and dozens of others like him to continue on with their terrorist activities. Now, we have to remember in all of this that in 2005, Israel fully withdrew from the Gaza Strip. We expelled 8,000 plus of our citizens who had lived there for generations. We redeployed all of our forces, and we put ourselves on the border, handing over the control to the Palestinian Authority. Since then, Hamas took over. On this level, Andrew, I would just question again, or put a question mark over one of the additional introductory comments that you made. Is this actually an international conflict? Is this an international conflict? Are there two states? There is no state of Palestine. It doesn't exist. It has never existed. Gaza, prior to Israel's taking control in 1967, was held illegally by Egypt. Prior to that, it was part of the British Mandate and allocated as part of the Jewish state. Prior to that, it was for 400 years, it was under Ottoman rule. So is there another state on the other side to make this into an international conflict? Now, let me just give you an interesting statistic about the demographic makeup of the terrorists who so viciously butchered and slaughtered the Israeli citizens. According to the CIA, and statistics put out by the CIA for 2023, there are 2,100,000 Gazans. At the same time, UNRWA claims that there are 1,577,522 Palestine refugees registered in Gaza. That means that on a statistical count, purely statistics, obviously it's hard to bring this down to an exact level. That means that 3 out of 4 of the terrorists who murdered, butchered, burnt Israelis alive, raped women, decapitated babies, and others, grew up and were educated in the UNRWA school system. The UNRWA school system teaches the curriculum of the Palestinian Authority. A second interesting statistic. On the 13th of September this year, to mark 30 years of the Oslo Accords, a Palestinian market research organization released their latest study. In that study, they asked, as they always do, if elections in the Palestinian Authority were to take place again, they haven't been held for the last 17 years, but if they were to be take place again, who would you vote for? Hamas, Fatah, others. Listen to the results in the Gaza Strip. Only in the Gaza Strip, 44% of the civilians in the Gaza Strip said that they would again elect Hamas. Let me say that again. 44% of the Palestinians in Gaza would like to support the homicidal terrorists who butchered, slaughtered, and massacred Jews just 2 weeks later. 32% said they would, only 32% said they would vote for Fatah. Another 2% said that they would vote for the PFLP, the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, another rejectionist organization, terror organization designated by Europe, America, and many countries around the world. Another 2% would vote for them. So we have a massive, really a truly massive section of the Palestinians in Gaza that actively support Hamas and other terrorist organizations. This is a reality which obviously Israel has to take into account going forward. Now, let me give you a little bit of a description of the situation on the ground and as part of the background for the military operations. Now, it is clear that Israel can no longer tolerate a terrorist, ISIS-like entity sitting on the other side of our border that could immediately infiltrate Israel and again carry out these kinds of massacres that continue firing as of this morning, as of 2 a.m. this morning, over 6,930 missiles indiscriminately targeting Israel's civilian population. Israel cannot deal with that anymore. That is not a reality that is possible. And so for the last 10 days, the Israeli Air Force has been targeting military targets in the Gaza Strip. Now, why does it look like there's just massive destruction in the Gaza Strip? That's a question that has to be asked and is part of the military necessity. Unfortunately, in the last 18 years of Hamas's control in the Gaza Strip, they and the other terrorists have entirely embedded themselves within the civilian population. They placed their rocket launchers in civilian locations, assuming that they have one of two options. Either Israel won't be able to identify, won't be able to attack because it's in the heart of the civilian environment, or they will be able to use the pictures of Israel attacking civilian houses in order to influence international opinion, never explaining, obviously, well, we were the ones who put our terrorist infrastructure into that area. They have dug attack tunnels under the entire Gaza Strip. If you're asking where are the water pipes that Israel has helped the international community bring into the Gaza Strip, well, Hamas has put out pictures how they have used those water pipes, cut them out, dug under the infrastructure, and have used those pipes as part of their missile arsenal. They have placed their ammunitions in mosques, in houses, under and adjacent to international institutions, UNRWA, UN institutions. All of these have been intentionally used by the terrorists to hide their terror infrastructure, hoping that Israel will either not attack, or if they do attack, they will be able to, as I said, then also invoke the international community, as we've seen the UN organizations in the Gaza Strip saying how many of the installations have already been damaged. They never say, watch carefully what they're saying. They never explain that, well, the Gazan terrorists placed their terror infrastructure and abused our installations. They just provide the pictures and statistics of how many UN institutions have been damaged. Mosques have been used and abused. We know, and this I would have as a word of caution also going forward, we know that one of the major Hamas command centers is in one of the lower levels of the main hospital, the Shifa hospital in Gaza. Now, this is a tremendous problem. This is a tremendous problem because on the one hand, the Gazans and the terrorists will use the pictures of, well, Israel is attacking a hospital. How despicable is this? Take into account that we know that there is intelligence that indicates that one of the major command centers of Hamas for them to run this war is placed intentionally under the hospitals. Now, just as one of the events going forward, and that has already come up, for example, Israel cut off the electricity or its supply of electricity to the Gaza Strip. There is Electricity is a basic function of the war going forward. This is how the terrorists act. This is what they need in order to power their command centers, to power their rocket firing. Someone's just unmuted themselves and is talking over me. To power their rocket systems, to power their communication centers. Everything is powered today by electricity. That is an imperative Israeli military objective, to cut off the abilities and capabilities of the terrorists. Now, what happened in order to get round that? What did the Gazan terrorists do? Yesterday afternoon, UNRWA, the UN Refugee Agency, put up a tweet saying that their offices had been attacked and looted, and the Gazan authorities, I'll give just a word on that as well, just a second, had stolen 24,000 liters of fuel from the UNRWA installations. That's how desperately they need the fuel for their military and war and terrorist capabilities. Unfortunately, considering the moral depravity of some of the actors, UNRWA within an hour had taken down that post, giving no explanation. Obviously, they were under heavy threats from the Gazan terrorists. Now, who did UNRWA say?
Maurice, just to interrupt, just one more minute, if you could.
Yeah, this is the closing sentence. Who did they say, Andrew, had been involved in that assault on their institution? The Gazan Ministry of Health. Now, you mentioned this Gazan Ministry of Health as also as the organization giving out statistics about the dead in Gaza. This is a Hamas-controlled organization. It is a branch of Hamas. It is an integral part of Hamas. Information put out by the Gazan Ministry of Health is there for propaganda means, and propaganda means solely. Information given by them should be treated in that manner, and with the understanding that this is information being put out by the ISIS-like terrorists in order to forward their war against Israel and their goal to destroy Israel.
Maurice, thank you so much. There's an awful lot there that we're going to chew on. I'm going to hand over directly to you, Avi Bell, Professor Avi Bell, to speak to us about how does Israel actually manage this operation, and particularly how do you, let's assuming there are legitimate military objectives, and actually I'd like to ask you as well, is this an international armed conflict or not, and what's the significance of that distinction? But assuming Israel has legitimate military objectives, how do you manage the humanitarian fallout of all of this? I mean, this is going to massively affect hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza who are embedded in this. Is it reasonably possible for Israel to achieve this objective of eliminating Hamas and at the same time doing what it must do to minimize loss, physical or other loss, for the ordinary civilians in the Gaza Strip? Thank you.
All right. I'm going to get to to answering your questions in a roundabout fashion, because I had some remarks that I think will help us understand the basic framework. I'll just tell you before I did, and I hadn't planned to do this, but I received this a joke this morning, and it was a cynical remark that someone had made about attacks on Israel's north. Now, I don't know if you were aware of this, but as the fighting is going on in Gaza, there is a terrorist organization that's much more powerful and much of the same orientation, of the same barbarity, but having a much more powerful military capacity. It's called Hezbollah. It's a Shia rather than Sunni Muslim terrorist organization, and its ties with Iran are closer than those of Hamas. It has, throughout this fighting, attacked steadily at a small scale Israeli targets, Israeli civilians, Israeli soldiers, rocket attacks, anti-tank fire, and the rest. And so the joke that I received was that there's these discussions in Israel about what should we do in the meantime about Hezbollah. And so the argument was, well, Israel should not allow itself to be drawn into a second front at this time. Israel doesn't have the capacity to carry on humanitarian relief operations in both the south and north at the same time. And I think that it's stated cynically, but it's understood. There is a very basic difference between the way Israel and the way this terrorist organization and its allies approach the conflict. I think it's not wrong to simply refer to them as barbarians. That is, they deliberately and in all ways act in an inhuman and grossly immoral fashion in their conduct of their operations, while Israel very consistently adopts a policy that has a moral code and a legal code, and there is no chance whatsoever that Israel is going to change that. It has never changed, and it is never going to change. It is the basic ethos of Israeli fighting that Israel follows a code of what's called purity of arms. And I'll actually read you the English translation of it. The IDF, the Israel Defense Force servicemen, will use force of arms only for the purpose of subduing the enemy to the necessary extent, and will limit his use of force so as to prevent unnecessary harm to human life and limb, dignity, and property. The IDF servicemen's purity of arms is their self-control and use of armed force. They will use their arms only for the purpose of achieving their mission without inflicting unnecessary injury to human life or limb, dignity, or property of both soldiers and civilians, with special consideration for the defenseless, whether in wartime or during routine security operations, or in the absence of combat, or in times of peace. Right? This is basic. It's never going to go anywhere. It's as basic as it is to Hamas that it is a sadistic, anti-Semitic, genocidal, terroristic organization that follows no civilized rules of humanity. It is just as basic to us that we will always operate by a strict moral code. Now, let me just take a step back now. The morality of armed conflict, the legality of operations in armed conflict is a difficult question because it involves necessarily on the good side and on the bad, right? The most evil fighters and the best fighters are dealing in death and destruction, right? A law-abiding army kills, and it destroys, and it maims. Now, the moral framework by which modern civilized societies operate is one that was actually established in the writings of the moral philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. And it basically dictates that we who have a moral code in acting in war ensure that our actions, even though we know that innocents will also be harmed, we aim our actions at legitimate targets only. That is, those objects of the other side that contribute to their ability to fight, those people on the other side who are participating in the fighting or are combatants. And we try to limit the collateral damage to civilians so that the damage to them is not excessive in relation to the military need. And I have to say that when you have an operation like this one, where the military need is to utterly destroy a terrorist organization that has the capacity to carry out barbarism of the level of the massacre that we saw on October 7th, an enormous amount of force has to be used. The military necessity is high, and it necessarily means that the tolerance for collateral damage is high. Now, if you look at the two sides, on the Hamas side, and we cannot allow this to go unremarked and unpunished. On the Hamas side, there are systematic war crimes all the way through. targeting of civilians as such, not only in the massacre of October the 7th, but in the rocket attacks that are going on all the time. And again, I hope we're not interrupted by one as we speak, on Israeli civilians on Israeli cities. But besides that basic one, there are all sorts of ancillary rules. Their taking and holding of hostages is illegal. Use of the civilian population is as human shields is illegal, and it's not simply that Hamas places its military objects within crowded urban areas. There are thousands of legitimate targets, maybe tens of thousands of legitimate Hamas legitimate targets within every Palestinian city in the Gaza Strip. It's also that they use specially humanitarian objects like Shifa Hospital, as Maurice mentioned, and Maurice was maybe soft pedaling this a bit. He said that according to Israeli intelligence, this is not according to Israeli intelligence. If you look at video of Hamas leaders being interviewed during past rounds of conflicts, you will notice that they are standing in the reception area of Shifa Hospital. You can see it in the background. It's not a difficult thing to see. They're not hiding it at all. Hamas engages in the crime of perfidy. That is, it has entered into ceasefires and pretend surrendered in order to turn around and attack and kidnap troops. That happened multiple times in the past. They've exploited humanitarian assistance, which is itself a crime. So, for example, by taking over fuel, food, medicines that have been supplied for humanitarian needs and stealing them for itself, it's committing a crime. Now, I don't even have to talk about the obvious crimes, the rapes, the torture, the mutilations of the deceased, and the what's called in the Rome Statute ethnic persecution. That is the engaging in degrading and awful behavior towards Jewish victims as Jews. Now, there's also, outside of the laws of war, Hamas is obviously violating the Genocide Convention. That is, with the purpose of killing the Jewish people in whole or in part. It is engaging in acts such as killing. That is a violation of the Genocide Convention. That imposes duties on everyone in the world. Every state in the world is required to prevent and punish the actions of Hamas. This is not a burden solely of Israel. This is the burden of the world, according to international law. Now, on the Israeli side, there's a very strict process. It's not simply that Israel has a process of training its soldiers to adhere to purity of arms. It's also that in targeting decisions are made by a procedure that ensures that the right objects only are targeted. The actions that are taken by Israel, such as the declared siege on all supplies to Gaza, are actions that are recognized in the laws of war of civilized nations as actions that can be undertaken. And when you're engaging in a combat with an urban foe like Hamas that embeds itself in the civilian population, it is a vital thing to do, to cut off all supply to it, because even without supply, Hamas is well positioned to cause enormous damage to the innocents as it tries to fight for its ability to continue carrying on atrocities. Now, I have to say that no matter how the fighting is done, there will be massive civilian casualties. There cannot help but be. As I said, Hamas is deeply embedded in urban locations, behind civilians, underneath hospitals, underneath schools, exploiting aid organizations. In some cases, the aid organizations themselves are fake. They're Hamas fronts. And under a situation like that, not only is it clear that civilians are going to be hurt in combat operations simply because that's the nature of war, right? Even when you have a law-abiding armed force like Israel's, it is expected there will be incidental damage to civilians and protected targets that is proportionate, meaning not clearly excessive in relation to the military necessity. The military necessity is great. There will be great damage to civilians. But it's also because the humanitarian relief is certain to be diverted by Hamas. It is not only Israel's right to prevent humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip, it is its legal duty, because it is under Security Council Resolution 1373, all states, not just Israel, all states are charged with preventing even indirect support to terrorist organizations like Hamas. If there's no procedure for distributing humanitarian relief that prevents Hamas from seizing it, then Israel is not permitted to allow it. Now, what then is the right answer? How do you save innocents in a case like this when they're being used as human shields by Hamas? And Israel has the right and the necessity to use deadly means to destroy the terrorist organization that will harm innocents. And the answer is clear, even if it's uncomfortable to our ears, and it is: we must rapidly evacuate as much as possible the civilian population of the Gaza Strip. We have to, if we can't force the terrorists to leave the civilians, we have to help the civilians leave the terrorists. Right? To date, the Egyptians are refusing to permit more than a token number of Gazan civilians to leave. In fact, the president of Egypt, Sisi, said that it's important, in order to preserve the Palestinian cause, it's important to force the Gazans to stay in place, which is unconscionable. It's just as unconscionable that even the United States, which is behaved better in this than the European Union and other states, even the United States has put pressure on Israel to admit humanitarian supplies and not place pressure on Egypt to admit Gazan evacuees, where it's quite clear there's only one way to reduce civilian suffering here, and that is rapidly to destroy Hamas and to evacuate as much as possible Gazan civilians from the war area. There's a pattern that happens in all these conflicts, and with this I'm going to close. The terrorist groups that are fighting Israel engage in massive, undeniable crimes against humanity, war crimes, crimes of genocide. And this is incidentally remarked on by people and then disregarded as irrelevant. And at the same time, those very terrorist organizations put out propaganda trying to paint the victims, the Jews, the Israelis, the Jewish state, as the perpetrators of the kinds of crimes that the terrorists themselves are carrying out. And unconscionably, this is just, I cannot understand how it happens again and again. People of good conscience echo the terrorist propaganda and fret about whether Israel is or is going to commit crimes, when it's quite clear that all of this is not only a lie, it's intended to serve the purposes of the terrorist organization itself. Now, it's designed, the purpose of the propaganda campaigns are to try to force Israel to stop, to end its operations and let this terrorist organization survive. But I can tell you that in this case, Israel is so shocked by the barbarity of the atrocities on October 7th. There is a widespread consensus in this country. Israel is not going to stop until this organization is destroyed. If the hypocrites of the world are going to scream, then they will have to scream. We have no choice. We are not going to stop until we remove this vile, barbarian, terrorist organization from this world. Andrew, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Avi. Thank you, Maurice. So we're going to open up for questions. I think you've put the case for Israel very, very strongly. Do we have any, Cynthia, any questions in the chat that we want to deal with?
Yes, we have a few questions. Thank you. But first, Johan wanted to say something to you and to relate to it. Andrew, would you like to start with that?
Sorry, which was that?
Johan Skerloff would like to relate to Maurice's contribution.
Okay.
If that would be possible.
Yeah, sure. Johannes?
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. Let me just say in short, I covered the Palestinian-Israeli conflict for about nearly 20 years as a journalist for Central European media, German-speaking and Czech media. I first of all want to say about the Shifa Hospital, Maurice already said that I did not know about the command structure or the command center under it. Avi already contributed to that. I just want to say I was the last time in the Shifa Hospital in 2008 after the Hamas takeover, and I personally saw the people with RPGs running around in the immediate area of the Shifa Hospital. So every journalist who was down there should be aware of that. I just wanted to underline that. Secondly, Maurice, I thank you very much for taking the load of the population, of the Palestinian population, and also for German population away. But as a German living now for 30 years in Israel, I'd like to take the chutzpah to contradict you. I think we have a deep problem within the Palestinian population and within, for that sake, also in German society. It is not something that comes from incitement from above. And we could have there a longer conversation on that. The reason why I would like to emphasize that is that anti-Semitism of whatever form it takes did a lot of harm to the Jewish people, but it never annihilated the Jewish people, but it always did much more harm to the haters. And if we have any concern for the Palestinians, or for that sake also for the Germans, we should address this issue. And I could bring you a lot of examples, whether it's interviews I've taken 1990s, 2000s within Palestinian society, long before the Palestinian Authority took over. And I mean, you can take Haaretz from, I think it was yesterday or so, they said, if Israel destroys the Hamas, they will grow something else, something similar to Hamas out of the Gaza Strip or out of it. So even Haaretz says it. There is a very deep problem. I do not have the answers, but we have to address it. And we do not have to always whitewash the normal population. We have to address it. Actually, it's also, I withdrew from journalism into theology again. And that was one of the reasons. It's a theological problem. And we do not have it just in Islam. We have it in Christianity. And sometimes the Palestinian Christians are the better Jew haters. I mean, I have proof for that. We have to address that. But in the Hamas charter, we have a quote of the Hadith. And people did exactly, the Hamas terrorists now did exactly what the Hadith there says. And we have to address that. That's not a thing at the side. Let me add one last thing to Avi's mention of the code of arms. I think it is very important, and I would like to say that as somebody who is very close to quite a few soldiers in the Israeli army. The code of arms of the Israeli army is not just in order to adhere to international law. It's not just in order to give a good image to the outside. It's for the very sake of Israeli soldiers, because everybody who has killed somebody has to live with it for a whole life. I know personally a Palestinian sharpshooter who has his way. He says, the eyes between you shot, or in between you placed your bullet, you will never, ever forget. And therefore, it's for the very sake of Israeli society that we have this code of arms, and we should emphasize it. It is selfish in a way that Israel is striving to be the most moral army in the world. I don't know whether that's always true. We can discuss that, but we do that for our very own interest. Thank you.
If I may say, one of the things that is quite obvious about Israeli society, if you've lived here long enough, is that Israelis have limited patience for the negative opinion of others. That is, it is expected that Israel and Jews more generally are going to be treated unfairly. The moral code of the army is not set. It was not written for others. It was not written for the rest of the world. It's not expected that the rest of the world is going to react positively or negatively to it. It's simply going to be something that it will be, at the best, part of the hypocritical attacks on Israel. We do it because of us, right? And it's a concept that's deeply embedded. And now that I'm too old to go to combat, I can look back and say it's a basic part of what it meant to be a professional in the army. That is, your professional duties include purity of arms. It's unthinkable to do otherwise. That's who we are.
Okay, thank you. Sylvia, any other questions in the chat that we need to deal with? Otherwise, I have some questions.
Yes, we have several questions, but I have put together some are for Avi, and I will tell them together, Avi, for you. If it is not an international conflict, but a domestic one, then how do we think about self-defense under customary international law, 51 Charter of the UN? Is it the wrong framework? Is it thought about as a matter of national security? And in addition to that, could you comment on the fact that Hamas is a non-state actor? What does the LOAC have to say about such a situation? And should this have any impact on our response?
Okay, so there's two different questions there. Okay, so one has to do with how self-defense works in a case like this, where a state is fighting with a terrorist organization in territory that is not an independent sovereign state, right? I mean, how we look at the Gaza Strip, that gets us in a whole mess, but it's not really relevant. Okay, it's not really relevant because you have ample precedent in international law for conflicts between states and international terrorist organizations. Think of the United States and Al-Qaeda, right? So in that case, it was acknowledged by the world that in an attack by an international terrorist organization against a state, the state has the right to invoke self-defense and the right to engage in international conflict. Now, if there's a right to engage in international conflict, that is to violate the sovereignty of another state in order to carry out self-defense operations, then surely it is possible to carry out self-defense operations that don't violate the territory of another state. Now, I will say that, if you look at the International Court of Justice, in one of its more shameful moments, it has a little aside in one of its opinions in which it says that the general rules of self-defense for against terrorist organizations don't apply when Israel is defending Jews against Palestinian terrorist groups. I think that is one of the most shameful remarks ever made by the International Court of Justice, and I don't think that any person who understands the law can possibly accept it. Now, that means that Israel has the right to fight. Now, do the rules of this gets us to the second part. What are the rules then? We're engaging in a conflict with an international terrorist organization. Let me just say why I'm calling it an international terrorist organization. It's because there's a definition of that too in international law. And if you look, for example, judgments of the Special Tribunal on Lebanon, they describe that what does it mean to be international? It means an international terrorist organization, one with an international element. That means that at least one of the perpetrators, at least one of the terrorists, and at least one of the victims have different citizenship, right? Which is clearly the case here. right? Or that some of the operations of the terrorist organization cross state lines, and Hamas operates in Lebanon and Turkey and Qatar, right? It's clearly an international terrorist organization. What are the rules that apply there? Now, the rules are the same basic rules. And by the way, this doesn't even matter if it's international or non-international regarding the basics. Distinction and proportionality. Israel has a right to target every single person who is a combatant for the terrorist organizations, and every single person, even if they're civilian, while they're participating in hostilities. And Israel has the right to do that, even though there will be expected collateral damage, so long as the damage is not clearly excessive in relation to Israel's very extreme military need. It doesn't change anything in that respect of importance. Now, does it change anything on the Hamas side? Well, Hamas is still violating the rules of distinction and proportionality grossly and repeatedly. The rules of basic civilized behavior, no raping, no torturing, no mutilating, those still apply in non-international conflicts. The rules of perfidy, right? No cheating on truces to attack the enemy, no attacking humanitarian objects, no stealing from humanitarian supplies, no engaging in genocide. All these are things that apply whether it's international or non-international. So I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever. And that legal nicety is something that we can worry about afterwards when this war is done and people like me are sitting back and writing articles.
Thank you, Avi. Sylvia?
Yes, there are many questions coming in, so I'm just picking, what is the role of the Red Cross in Gaza? It seems that the Red Cross in Gaza is subservient to Hamas. Is it true that Hamas uses Red Cross hospitals to hide weapons?
Go ahead, Maurice.
Unfortunately, the Red Cross in Gaza is entirely absent, aside from its criticism of Israel. As we know, the Gazan terrorists have been holding 2 Israeli citizens for the last 8 years, the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers. The Red Cross has been entirely impotent in doing anything about that, entirely impotent about fulfilling its humanitarian role. Because the problem is not only with the Red Cross. The problem is, and this also relates to some of Avi's remarks, the problem is we're dealing with a terrorist organization. These people have no regard for basic decency, let alone the rules of warfare of civilized states, let alone the humanitarian functions of the Red Cross. And they have no compunction. In fact, they intentionally use hospitals and civilian installations to hide and fire their attacks on Israel as part of their strategy. So the Red Cross really hasn't done anything and is really part of those that mechanism of Hamas to attack and spread Israel's spread the attacks on Israel by the terrorists, and at the same time it completely fails on any of its humanitarian mission regarding Israel and its civilians. Obviously, there's been no clear demands of the International Red Cross shouting from every single top of every single building of the world, you cannot hold civilians as hostages. We demand to see them. Mealy-mouthed condemnations. And well, this isn't cricket, as the British would say, are not what's required of the International Red Cross. And as long as they continue to hide their and play down their involvement in this conflict, so they cause damage only for themselves.
I just wanted to add a word. Let's distinguish between different bodies. There's the International Committee of the Red Cross. And then there are the local Red Cross societies, in this case, Red Crescent societies. They're under different management. They do different things. Now, on the ground, the Red Crescent, Palestinian Red Crescent Society is without any doubt penetrated by terrorist organizations. This is a well-known fact. And so when you're talking about facilities of the Red Crescent in Gaza, do they cooperate with Hamas? Absolutely. Right? There's no doubt about that. Now, then there's a different question about what does the International Committee of the Red Cross do? The International Committee of the Red Cross doesn't control the Red Crescent Society on the ground. What it could do is it could press the Red Crescent Society to actually abide by the rules, or it could decertify it, claim that it is no longer entitled to use the symbol of the Red Crescent because it is abusing it. The ICRC has not done that. The other thing the ICRC could do is it could use its power to put out information to try to press for actions against the Hamas criminals, and to link efforts with Israel in enforcing the laws, even to the very basic things of getting access to hostages. Instead, what the ICRC is doing is the opposite. It's propagandizing against Israel for following the law, and it's maintaining absolute silence, as Maurice said, about Hamas violations of the law. So both are acting improperly. Both the ICRC and the Palestinian Red Crescent are acting improperly, but in different ways.
Can I jump in with a question?
As we speak, and unfortunately, the statement that came out from the International Red Cross, irrelevant and irrespective of the placement of the terrorist infrastructures, which everybody knows about. Everybody's seen the pictures. Everybody's seen the videos. The International Red Cross condemned Israel's limitless destruction of Gaza, as if we are not attacking the hundreds, the thousands, the tens of thousands of military targets in the Gaza Strip intentionally placed there. This is the moral stain on the International Red Cross.
Can I jump in with a question, please? There's an article just published by Ben Saul, Chair of International Law at University of Sydney. City, I think you know well, Avi, given you were born there. And the title of his article, published in The Age, "A War Crime is Still a War Crime, Even in Retaliation." And he makes a number of statements where he thinks Israel is or could be breaching international law. One of them is, he says, the 16-year blockade has already debilitated Gaza. The latest turning of the screws is unlawful and could constitute the war of the crime of starving civilians. It could also be unlawful collective punishment if it aims to retaliate against all Gazans for Hamas sins. How would you respond to that claim? First of all, that the crime of starving civilians, and secondly, unlawful collective punishment.
Andrew, if I may, before Avi gives the legal analysis, just some factual analysis to undermine that argument. Firstly, this claim that Gaza is under siege and is under blockade is simply not factually true. If you go to the statistics provided by OCHA, a UN organization, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, since the beginning of the year, some 402,000 entrances from Gaza into Israel, another 100,000 exits from Gaza to Egypt. Egypt and Gaza have an extensive border. Just coming through Israel, the first 8 months of the year, 52,000 truckloads of goods and equipment going into Gaza through Israel alone. This is not a situation of blockade. This argument of the blockade has been constant is simply factually untrue and doesn't go even with OCHA statistics. It has to be open and closed brackets. OCHA is a vilely anti-Israel organization. If you read their situation reports without knowing what's going on the ground, you too would hate Israel. That's the vile nature of their reports. And so just on that level, I think we can possibly, just on the factual level, before getting to the legal analysis, clearly destroy that argument that's being made.
Okay, thank you.
Right, on the factual, let's just understand there's a difference in context between since October 7th and before that. On October 9th, Israel did impose, the defense minister announced a complete siege on Gaza, and that means that, among other things, it's not allowing any supplies in. Not only that Israel is not supplying, but that Israel is not facilitating the supplies of others, and that's again, as I said, it's a lawful activity. It's lawful to impose a siege. It's lawful to impose a naval blockade as part of war. Now, the criticism here, the criticism that Andrew, that you're talking about, is that any action in wartime, killing, destroying, bombing, besieging, blockading, etc., it can be illegal or legal depending on your intent. Now, of course, there are certain actions that are always illegal, like raping, right? There's no possible excuse for Hamas activity there. But when you're talking about the basic things that one does in war, such as besieging and blockading, such as bombing enemy targets, etc., when one does those things, if your intent is right, then it's legal so long as it's not this collateral damage is not excessive. If your intent is wrong, then it's illegal. Now, what is this gentleman doing when he makes the argument that Israel is committing a war crime by starving the population, etc.? He's saying, well, we have to judge these actions under international law according to intent. And allow me, please, to ascribe the most evil intent possible to the Jewish state. And let me overlook the intent of the actually evil people altogether. And then on that basis, I conclude that having attributed to them evil, they are committing the evil thoughts that I think they are. Now, it's not just an insult to the intelligence. It's an insult to the conscience of any right-thinking person. Of course, Israel is not blocking supplies to this terrorist organization in order to starve the innocent. How dare he?
Yeah. So, well, there is this sense, and this article goes on, and it concludes, I mean, we don't have time to get into it, but there is this sense that this whole campaign is being driven by vengeance and not by justifiable means and intentions.
Right, and this too is an attribution of motivation. If you listen very carefully at the statements made by all the military planners, where they all say the same thing. They're all saying the same thing. This is not about vengeance. This is about removing the unacceptable threat to Israeli civilians and to Israel as a state from the presence of a sadistic, anti-Semitic, genocidal terrorist organization in control of territory that borders Israel and that has already destroyed Israeli communities. That's what this is about. It's stated repeatedly and frequently. Right? There is not once that you will see that a military head planner has said, no, forget all that. Our real mission is to carry out revenge, or our real means of doing this is going to be unlimited. We're going to do whatever comes into our mind. There is no Israeli military planner that has said that. There's not going to be, because it's an attribution of motive that is the propaganda strategy of the terrorist organization itself and those who are apologists for it. And so again, I don't know who this gentleman is, but really, how dare he?
Okay, well, we're going to have to wrap. He's the professor of international law at the University of Sydney. So he's a very well-known and influential voice in Australia and beyond. We're going to have to wrap up. Sylvia, I know that you've got many other questions that people want to ask. I'm afraid we don't have time. It's now 1:15 here in Europe. We're going to draw this to a close. There are many issues that we're going to look at going forward. Sylvia, is there anything before I just wrap up that you want to mention or announce?
No, everything's okay.
Okay. So apologies for those to whose questions we've not been able to give attention. We'll do our best. We will record your questions and try and deal with them in the next series of webinars. We're going to be doing this going forward, engaging with a whole range of speakers and people to give different perspectives. I want to thank Professor Avi Bell and Advocate General Maurice Hirsch for your contributions today. You've given us a lot to think about. And I thank everybody for your participation. I would like to invite you to visit our website, www.thinc-israel.org. Visit our website, sign up for our e-bulletin and other publications. Please do consider making a donation to Thinc. We need your support to be able to continue this work of education, advocacy, and research. Once you've signed up, we'll keep you informed of future events. As I say, we're going to be doing these webinars and other events going forward. And without further ado, I draw this webinar to a close and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.
Let me just say thank you and God bless you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.